All right, good afternoon again, everyone. We go from highlight to highlight here in the old fire station. So let's do the thing I like to do. A big round of applause to let everyone know we're about to start. We've just had an amazing session with Miriam Shansi and her novel, and now we're switching to poetry. We've got two poets, we've got three poets actually on stage this afternoon. One of them is going to be leading this conversation, or maybe following the conversation, depending on whether he falls behind. That's Michael Kelleher sitting in the middle. Michael is visiting us from the US, where he's based at Yale University and is the administrator of the Wyndham Campbell Prizes. Several Caribbean writers have won the Wyndham Campbell Prizes in recent years, including Anthony Vahni Capildeo, closest to me on stage. And as I'm sure you know, their latest book, Polkadot Wounds, is also the poetry winner of the 2025 OCM Bocas Prize. And at the far end is Lawrence Scott, who we all know as a fiction writer all the way back to Witch Broom, a long time ago. Many novels since then. Turns out Lawrence is also a poet. Finally, he's seen the light. And Looking for Cazabon is his debut book of poems, an extraordinary book of poems. We are happy and privileged to have all these poets here with us this afternoon, and now I'm going to get out of the way.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia. Quiaque meruisti portare, alleluia. Resurrexit sicut dixit, alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia. Gaude et letare Virgo Maria, alleluia.
Quia surrexit Dominus vere, alleluia.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia. Quiaque meruisti portare, alleluia. Resurrexit sicut dixit, alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our two guests, Lawrence Scott, Anthony Vahni Capildeo. Nicholas stole everything that I was going to say in my introduction, so I will not repeat it for you, except to say that we're going to vary slightly from the format. What you just witnessed was a form of antiphonal singing, and we're going to try and mimic that in the way that we present the poetry today. And so we'll have Anthony Vahni is going to start with a poem, and then Lawrence will follow, and then we'll have conversation in between, and we'll go back and forth throughout the reading, and then we'll have some questions at the end. Anthony.
Summer, Lanson, St. Cuthbert, Maine, where stone runs like honey, because the sea is a type of desert, spine of self-stripping thorns, now being ruined. Warming to you, I let in the light, you rose stem, long ago, newly dead and arisen. Treasure what you say, because nobody's real face exists yet. Polkadot wounds, where stone runs like honey.
Each time he looked up, there was more brightness. How to catch it before it vanished? How to catch you, Dudu darling? His hand moved constantly, drawing, dabbing, hovering, hesitant, and then suddenly intent upon its conclusions. As he held his brush up to measure scale, he sat back and viewed the sketch from a distance, tempted then to thinking it completed. He was already imagining the lithographic process in Paris. He put that out of his mind, just him and his island with its light. Only later would he send it to Sicily for him to rub on stone, perform his alchemy.
So I think I'd like to start, Anthony, by talking about the source of this book, or the title of this book, which you mention in the second to last line of the poem you read, Polkadot Wounds. Where did that title come from, and how does that did that shape the way that you put the collection together, or is it, do you see it as sort of a single one-off poem that is part of a collection?
The poem actually was written quite late as the collection came together, but I began writing the collection during the pandemic when I had two health breakdowns, one a diagnosis with CPTSD and the second COVID and long COVID. And I was unable to write except in very small images in a tiny notebook which fit in the palm of my hand. And I started thinking that these images were like pointilliste art. So rather than writing the long kind of woven texts I used to write, I started creating pointilliste poems. And eventually, when I found myself in front of the honey-colored wood statue of St. Cuthbert, Maine, who was hanged, drawn, and quartered, and beheaded, and whose skull was paraded up till recently through the streets of Launceston in Cornwall, then I realized that there was something about the polka dotting of those wounds, not as what is necessary to happen, but as what necessarily did happen.
And Lawrence, can you tell us a little bit about the story of how this book of poems, you were researching a novel and using the excess material, I guess, to take care of, to write these poems, and then you published them 20 years later?
Yeah, well, I was on a fellowship here in Trinidad at the UTT, a very generous fellowship for 3 years. So I was researching the life and times of Michel-Jacques Cazabon. And yeah, so while really working on the novel, in my notebook, there would be these reflections, if you like, which were not to do with the novel necessarily, not necessarily to do with any Cazabon paintings, though sometimes they are. But I also had a project going with my partner Jenny. We would go to spaces in Trinidad where Cazabon had painted to see what the contemporary site was like now, for instance, so like down to Cedros or North Post or somewhere. But then it was never a sort of simple writing about that. It was more, the poems gave me a space to kind of really just be with myself, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, maybe a follow-up question I want to ask you as somebody who, I write poetry, and that's kind of it. I don't write criticism, I don't write fiction, and I wonder, I'm always interested to hear when somebody, especially after a long career writing fiction, like, what was it about poetry, or what was it about this material that you were working with that lent itself to poetry for you in a way that it never had before?
Well, I did always write poetry. But I never really had the confidence to do much about it. And I sort of also this having to go through pamphlets and notebooks and get all sorts of, I just thought, I can't do that. So if people want my poems, they have to take it on the strength of my prose. And I always used to talk like that. I used to say the prose was the work and the poetry, well, the poetry, would come on. And, but the poem I read is from the section in the book which is called After Cazabon on the Road. And that, they are all taken from bits that were taken out of the novel. And I found my 14 lines eventually. None of this was planned at the time when it was being written. And actually my mentor in England, who is Mimi Calvati, she said that she, often started many of her poems as prose, and then it really is to do how you shape the lineation and that sort of thing. So not a great difference in a way between, and sometimes it's a put down. People say, oh, your prose is too poetic, so.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, so I suppose a weakness in my poems is they've got too much narrative in a simple sense, maybe, yeah.
All right, could you read the next one in your...
Okay. Discovery Bay, down Cedros. Tide in. Now that Cologne has come and gone, we are left with history books, and this time when driftwood is caught with a tangled seine in the snare of the mangrove and clogged slime. At Fullerton, the fishing boats creak, no fish. The mooring ropes, taut as whips, trap our feet. My friend tries to hook his carrete, but his catfish and crow to throw back. As the lone fisherman, meditative at the end of the jetty, casts his lines, frigates and pelicans soar above. See what we don't see, bodies, floating crimes, among the plastic bottle detergents, polystyrene foam cups dragged by the currents.
Full circle bells for Vahni Capildeo. Mama, I'm swimming down 3 flights of stairs in green light. You can't hear me yet. The tree I'm walking past has put on ocean airs. Up 2 more flights, I can't hear for the bell's cathedraling connection. Visible to invisible world, embrace. The box sits blackly on the landing wall. Aye, box, you're too high up. A gecko on the stairs, my body stretches, flattens, visible to students who go home, not phone home. Tree doesn't sound submarine to them. No bells, no whistles, hum and buzz, press on their airs. No bloody privacy. So put on airs they can't translate. Hola, dígame, box, can I get home on this line? Riding bells, the idea of earthquakes shatters up the stairs. Whales dive, chew through cable. Wind struck, a tree snaps wires. Numbers make you visible. I dial them, the dirt ain't visible, but grotty to my finger pads. Coined airs join bells, hojas rojas, singe the frosty tree. I flatten like a gecko to the box for a collect call. Dios, cuantas stairs. America's one south, submarine cable, bells. Drink purpling Virginia creeper. Bells are more than bread. Mira, what's visible till it compounds and vanishes. Your stairs are an island, full of twangling airs. Sway and speak your heart into a box. Your mother's voice is leafing like a tree. While leaves are falling from the ocean tree, you must pass on the way to bells that tick 5 hours apart. A telephone box is a time zone box. You're a visible time traveler, but give yourself no airs, Chiquite. There are drunk rowers on the stairs. 1990s Victorian stairs. Your voice held in my hand, mine thinned by airs. My dusk, your noon, only the time box visible.
So, Anthony, I couldn't help noticing when I read that poem that it's written in a very specific poetic form called a sestina. I wonder if you could tell us what a sestina is and how you approach form, because I think my experience of your work is that form is what it needs to be in the moment of the writing for you, and that you are conversant in many traditional forms of poetry, but are also quite comfortable moving completely outside the box and working in more experimental forms or working in prose forms. And so why this sort of classical sestina, and how do you navigate that, moving back and forth from these traditional forms to more experimental verse?
A sestina is a poem which has got 6 end words, and in the first stanza you get these words in order. Imagine A, B, C, D, E, F. And then in the next stanza, the end words go F, A, B, E, etc., etc. And then you weave them round and round and round in that way until you come to the last 3 lines. In the last 2 or 3 lines, all the 6 words flow together. And there are 3 reasons why I chose a sestina for this. One, it was commissioned by Sarah Jackson for her telephony project, and she paid me for the poem. And I thought that if I'm being paid for this, I have to be seen to do a thing. And everybody knows a sestina is a hard thing to do. But the second reason I did it was that I experienced the sestina form in terms of a sort of weaving, and the telephone lines, the underground and submarine cables, so the literal fibers were very present to my mind. And then the third reason was simply because of the situation that I thought of, which was the making collect calls from my Oxford College staircase. It really was resonant with the bells of Christ Church Anglican Cathedral, and therefore I wanted the words, the end words, not as weaving, but as resonance. I think it's Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who may or may not be somewhere in the audience, but is around the festival, who writes so beautifully in Undrowned Marine Mammals about the reverberation of sound being endless. And I like to think that those reverberations, the submarine reverberations, are also somewhere inscribed in the stones of these islands and those islands.
I'm always curious about how somebody writes a sestina, because I think many people approach it in different ways. So do you start and make a list of your 6 words, or do you start writing the lines first and then find the end stops in the first stanza and then start to develop those as you go through?
I sit down and do imaginative contemplation of the scene I'm going to write, and then the 6 words arise to my mind, and then I do write them out in order because I'm worried about getting it wrong, but I also write lots of marginalia in which I deliberately get it wrong. But please could you explain to us, Mike, what imaginative contemplation is for those who might not know?
Well, I was going to ask you that question, actually, but the question I really had was, so when you say I think we can imaginatively contemplate you imaginatively contemplating, and then you said that the words arrived. And so what do you mean by that? Do you see the words before you? Do you hear them? Or are they just like part of the imaginative plane? Like how do they arrive for you?
Sometimes I do see words, and I wrote about this in my first book, where I talked about seeing lines of texts in various fonts, scrolling past at various speeds on a background which looked like skin, human skin, lit from within. Fortunately, I don't see that too often. And a lot of the times, actually the closest thing, and I'd quite like to pass this question back to you, Lawrence, is a bit like the visions in Elred's Sin, where you get a mixing of times and places. So I get a mix of images, words, sounds, shadows and lights and characters from different times. And I have to sit and sift that into something that would be comprehensible to a reader.
You chose for your whole book to write in the sonnet form, which
Except the long poem.
except for
at
the long
the end.
poem, right? For most of the book, the sonnet form. So, what was it about the sonnet that attracted you to the why is that particular form, probably the most commonly used traditional form in English language poetry, the 14-line poem with a million different variations on it. But why that form for what you were trying to do?
Well, they eventually got to that, and I thought, I wasn't going to attempt things like sestinas. But when I did poetry classes with students in school, I would set them sestinas because that was quite a good sort of exercise. So I would say my sonnets are mainly, in a way, coming from a Shakespearean sonnet, but they're not all Shakespearean sonnets. And some are free, they got the 14 lines, they got the sestet and the octet and the changing of at the end. I am an apprentice. And the sonnet seemed foolishly easier than other forms. I'm getting to that in my next collection, to have some other poems, other kinds of forms. No, they just seemed an easy way. And also, I think I explained in my preface, they just seemed to fit the side of the watercolor that Cazabon painted in. They're very small watercolors, and these were just, and I know when we came to publish them, Polly Patillo, my publisher and editor, said we must only have one sonnet on each page. We mustn't crowd the page and all of that. We were very sure about that. So it was a kind of easy route, but I know it isn't easy. Yeah. And then, of course, my book is for Jenny, my partner, but it's also remembering Derek Walcott. And Derek does all kinds of things with the sonnet and gets very blown out sort of thing, and then and it seems to me. So all that was, that gave me a bit of more, freedom, if you like. But, I'm not practiced enough. Yeah.
I was sitting here enjoying myself listening to Lawrence, and I forgot that I actually have to get up and do anything again. So this is from quite a long poem, a prose poem called A Short Prayer to Coffee. It's a very long poem, A Short Prayer to Coffee, which crosses the sea. And I'm only going to read the first part of it. A short prayer to coffee, which crosses the sea. Prayer lurks in the uncertain air between poetry and philosophy, in the heat at the coppery base of the jazva, in the steam of the human breath meeting the ha of a northern morning where the sun rises orange over a bitter sea. Witness this endeavor of faith in the poet Helen and the philosopher Aaron's Leeds Coffeehouse conversational book project. Additionally witness the accompanying assertions of faith, such as the faith in almonds and the acts of faith accompanying these additional assertions of faith. Witness the extension of faith to California, a land whose existence remains unproven to me by experience. California also of oranges and salt water, California of wildfires, California of sequoias, California producer of 80% of the world's almonds, a land of silica mines, fistfuls of protein, and air miles.
East Coast, Manzanilla. The road is like old time through Cocoa Shade. Once I've left Sangre Grande's slow traffic. Cocoa pods, purple, yellow, lanterns fade. Villages crowd out with soca music till I hit Manzanilla's churned brown surf. The green interior of Nariva Swamp, Nariva River, the long Cocal's surge, Radix Point, and the brown Otois' slow slurp. These are those mileposts on the heart's journey, the beat of the ocean, beat of the heart. Pujas prayed, garland the waves, while jandis fluttering from bamboo poles erase the hurt. With these and all other prayers, I have counted the murdered, those murdered, still more murdered.
Well, since you both mentioned prayer in your last two poems, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the significance of prayer or spirituality or religion in general to the way you approach your work, the way you approach sound in your work, the way you approach images in your work. Because I do think that there is a relation between the kind of repetitions of prayer and song and like the chant that you guys did at the beginning, and the sort of repetitions that happen in a poem, as well as, I do think of images in poetry as sort of private devotions often in the way that a reader relates to them, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that resonates with you and the way you approach your work.
Yeah, as I was saying, the poems, as distinct from the novel that I was writing, which was quite a big novel, was where I did my thing, if you like. And with that poem, for instance, where I reflect on some of the sheer beauty of this island, and also the terror that exists beneath. And so there's a kind of a prayer, I suppose. It is a sort of prayer. I say that, and I repeat why I'm praying. And I do this in other poems as well. I've chosen, actually, the poems here to read today, which are much more the sort of rather edgy ones, maybe. But I know what you're saying. Of course, Anthony has just come upon, well, I don't know how long her journey was, but upon the sort of religious life, in a way. I left the religious life. So I don't pray in a sort of, but I didn't leave Gregorian chant, which is what we started with. I didn't leave plain chant. And my partner Jenny would tell you that I irritatingly whistle plain chant sometimes. And then, for instance, the Salve Regina, not the Salve Regina, but the Regina Caeli. I was at a Renaissance Singers in London recently, and they had a whole other arrangement, and I didn't recognize it. And then I said, oh my God, that is the Regina Caeli. I could get up and sing the whole thing right now, and it all came back, and I hadn't sung that since 1967. But I had been singing it as a boy at Mount St. Benedict. There's 6 of us in the choir. So, and I remember distinctly when I first heard Gregorian chant. So I don't pray prayer. Yes, I'm dealing with one part of your question. But of course, yeah, I think, yeah, I'm very alert to sound and repetition, and that's not in a kind of labored way. I think it, as you say, the words come. Strangely, and of course, the more you write, the more they come, and the habit of writing. That is something, I say it in my preface, I daringly showed two of these things to Derek Walcott, and he said, well, carry on.
When I did that, he goes, "These poems are shit."
He said, carry on. It's a bit like when I asked Lovelace when I first met him, I want to write, He said, good, carry on. No one gave me any advice or anything like that. But yeah, I've taught poetry, I've taught literature, so I'm aware of these things in a very different way to when you come to practice it, and for it to emerge out of yourself and your needs. And of course, for me, the dawn is the best time for that to happen. Yeah.
Anthony, same question to you, but I wanted to just mention something that you had said when we were recording the profile video. You had this sort of brilliant inversion of a very common statement that people make about their spirituality, where you said, if this were a dating app, I would say that I'm religious but not spiritual. What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that we're surrounded by many, many spirits. And one of the things that you can find out if you grew up in Trinidad is that the invisible world is as present, if not more present, than the visible world. And even if you don't believe in spirits, if you look with an anti-colonial eye into the deep time of something like the beaches, as so many writers before me have said much better, you can see the return of the tide, you can see the sunken histories, and you can see the sea not only as erasure but inscription. So that is one thing. The other thing is, if you're taking the spiritual seriously, would you get into an unmarked taxi at night with a driver you don't know who promises to take you somewhere very fast, but he's not going to tell you how much he's going to charge you? And if you pick to do magic with any kind of spirit, how do you know which spirit you have got into the car of? This is just, hypothetical. But going back to the idea of prayer, though, I think that people can be in a state of prayer without it necessarily feeling spiritual. So when people curse, I think very often when people curse or blaspheme, that is actually a prayer like in the Psalms, because you're having a really strong response, you're calling out against an injustice, you are moved in some way. So I would often like to hear cursing as prayer that comes out just a little bit wrong. Or similarly when you're in silence, deep silence, that is a contemplative state which could be akin to prayer. But also there's a question of whether prayer could be praise or lament. And I was thinking as I was reading Lawrence's book, as I was reading your book, Lawrence, I shouldn't third person you in front of you, that it's very similar in some ways to Kai Miller in Nearby Bushes, where Kai cites all the uncharted goings-on in nearby bushes, whether it's sex that society doesn't want to think about, people, corpses that are buried, treasures or loot, but very often corpses, very often it's murder. And I was thinking that he has the language of report, of chronicle, of analysis, but you, Lawrence, have the language of lament and praise. And so Kai's book moves towards academia and the media in good ways, but yours in a way moves towards prayer. And as you were talking about Cedros and murder, I was hearing how murder is also like murmur, and the murmur of the sea.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, my religious order is known to talk and not shut up.
So I think it's time for us to start taking some audience questions. If you'd like to raise your hand and then please speak into the microphone, that would be helpful.
Check. First of all, Anthony, you speak. Oh, should I stand up? Oh man, come on. Hello.
Hi.
Ta-da. Anthony, you speak in poems, so Thank you. It's beautiful to listen to you, so I appreciate that. Lawrence, my question's for you. Does teaching literature help or hinder you writing it? And if so, how?
Well, I'm not teaching anymore, which is a great freedom, actually, in terms of my time. But I wouldn't say that teaching hindered writing. It's taken me a long time to get around to publishing poetry. But I mean, I have stacks of poems. So it's just that, why did I start on the prose? And I have a line somewhere saying, in a notebook, I think, just so much prose, when was there time for a poem? The prose, as I think I said before, the prose has always seemed to be work, and the poem was like a little holiday. But if I had spent the whole morning writing a poem, I think, oh my God, I haven't written any other novel that I'm writing, you know? But then I would have preferred to carry on writing the poetry. But then, you know, something on your shoulder, a lot of people would say, yeah, a lot of people said to me about writing generally, why are you not doing a proper job? And, you know, so, no, I didn't see particularly teaching literature and teaching language as a hindrance to writing anything. And of course, you read so many other writers, and to me, that is actually what actually, I think this is how you learn to write, actually, reading other writers, yeah. It's mine.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for the lovely readings. Would it be possible to request a reading? To request a reading
Of
from Anthony?
Of a specific poem, or
Windrush? Is that in there? Is that in there?
the Turn and Live poem.
Yeah.
It's long,
Oh,
but okay, I was going to read it tonight, Marina. But yeah, I was told yesterday that it's impossible to say no to you. And turn and live. The sacrifice got up off the altar. Become an archaeologist of your lungs. Windrush is the name of a ship, not of a generation. Windrush is the name of a ship, not of any situation. Windrush is the witchcraft name of a ship waterlining us into uncharted, obligatory, and perpetual migration. The sacrifice got up off the altar. Become an archaeologist of your lungs. The naming of ships is a terrible thing, the terrible mother tell me. I came in a ship called Threat Vector. I came in a ship called Dust to Dust. Who came in a ship called Willing Ambassador? Who came in a ship called Evidence of Funds? Did I dance with you on the blue carpet? Was your ship called the Providence? The Invitation? Was your ship called Guerrilla Diplomacy? Go back where you came from, citizen, says terrible motherland. Whether that means overseas or going back under the sea. Citizens, life forms. Listen to the lady. She is a consultant anonymizer, a high mobility native of Fortress Trolley. We are phantasmagorically, primarily and politically lightless and all-bearing creatures, put down, not undrowned, gone beyond, beyond drowned. The sacrifice got up off the altar. Become an archaeologist of your lungs. A woman is sweeping the sea. In the father's words, in Kamau's words, a woman is sweeping the sea. They still say in English, a ship is a she. Who say so? The ship is a thing of itness, witness, and creator, fury of awake, raking over of witness. The island scholar is sweeping the carpet in her London digs, sweeping the sea grey, the pea souper carpet in no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, London's aspirational digs. That carpet had etiquette. It demanded her to accept it in its misty itness as grey, grey like ethical practice, dove or pigeon grey. Could the island scholar trust loose-talking fibre after she studied the French liberator Charles de Gaulle, who dismissed our archipelago as specks of dust? She sweeps and a pattern emerges, stabilizing as many colors, stabilizing as a miracle, a many-colored pattern wanting to dance beside her feet after she was forced to breathe in dust, settling and unsettling, the miracle of many colors. The sacrifice got up off the altar. Become an archaeologist of your lungs.
We have time for a few more questions if people want to raise their hands.
Could I request another reading from Lawrence, please?
And we have time for another reading from Lawrence, please.
Or even a little bit of singing.
Shh, you're ruining the secret.
There was a poem I wanted to. Is this slide? Is this a poem I wanted to get to? I could have chosen it right at the beginning, but I didn't. Sorry about this. So, as we're celebrating Lovelace in this 15th Bocas, I told you about these journeys my partner and I did across the island looking for Cazabon. Now, Cazabon could not have got to the east coast because the forest was too dense. He could have gone right around, with a ferry. I think Lord Harris did that. But anyway, in my novel, I take Cazabon to the East Coast. But anyway, we used to go up the East Coast a lot, the Northeast Coast, to Francis Trace. And this is a poem for Earl Lovelace. And it was written some time ago. It was written during the period when I was doing the research for Light Falling on Bamboo. Dear Earl, I think how the years have passed now since Jenny and I first drove up the coast to visit you and Jean and the children, how the country opened up for us. We parked just off the main road, Francis Trace. Still the sign there. This year, where we stopped on the corner, remembering with photographs that time lost and found. There's a new bridge over the river where the children fish for conchs. There's that same dry season breeze blowing fragrance in limes, the mango trees' branches over the track to where the house stood leaning into the forest. We hold time in words, listening to those voices from the yards.
bother to ask a question.
All right. All right, so go ahead. You guys finish up here?
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia. Quia quem meru isti portare, alleluia. Resurrexit, sicut dixit, alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia. Gaude et laetare Virgo Maria, alleluia.
Quia surrexit Dominus vere, alleluia.
Thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Anthony Vahni Capildeo. Lawrence Scott. Good night.